I want to tell you about a screw. One stainless screw, the kind you buy by the boxful and never think twice about. I drove it into a piece of white oak on a garden gate I was building, out behind the shop one wet spring, and I felt the grain split under it before I even heard it crack. A hairline. Nothing you would notice from a step back, but I knew. 2 winters later, that gate sagged on its hinge, the split had opened, the water had gotten in, and the corner had gone soft and punky in my hand. Punky is just the old word for wood that has started to rot from the inside, soft like cork. I had done everything the modern way. Good screws, good glue, good kiln-dried lumber, and it still failed me inside of 2 years. So I went looking for people who built things out of wood that did not fail. Not in 2 years, not in 200. And that search took me all the way out to sea, to the largest wooden machines that human hands have ever made. The wooden ship of the line. For the better part of 2 centuries, this was the most powerful object on Earth. A floating fortress of oak, 3 decks of guns, some of them carrying more than 100 cannon. His Majesty's Ship Victory, the one you can still walk through today in Portsmouth, carried 104 guns and was built from around 6,000 trees. Whole forests went into a single hull. Nations measured their own strength by how many of these they could put to sea. For 200 years, nothing on the water could touch them. So how did every last one of them end up as firewood inside of a single lifetime? Because that is what happened. A man who was a boy when these ships ruled the world lived to see them hauled up and broken for scrap. And the reason why is going to change how you think about the joint you cut this weekend. Stay with me. If you had stood on the quay at Portsmouth in the autumn of 1805, the year of Trafalgar, and asked any shipwright there whether the wooden wall would ever be beaten, he would have laughed in your face. These ships had won every war that mattered. The yards were full. The oak was seasoning in the ponds. The trade went back longer than anyone could remember. Not one of those men had any idea what was coming, and it would come from the least likely place. Not a storm, not rot, something built in a rival's shipyard. But before we get to what killed them, I need you to understand what made them last, because that is the part you can actually use. And it starts with the one thing these builders almost never did. They almost never trusted metal to hold the wood together. Think about my stainless screw for a second. Metal and wood are 2 different animals. Wood is hygroscopic, which is a long word for a simple truth. It drinks moisture out of the air and it gives it back, breathing in and out with the seasons, swelling in the damp and shrinking in the dry. Your screw does none of that. So every year, for the whole life of that joint, the wood is moving and the metal is standing still, and where the 2 of them meet, the wood tears itself a little wider. That is your split. That is water's front door. And it began long before the fastening, with the timber itself. These builders would not touch green wood, wood still full of the tree's own sap and water, because green wood shrinks and checks as it dries and pulls a hull apart from within. So they seasoned it, sometimes for years, stacked in open sheds or sunk in mud ponds, until it had given up its restlessness and moved as little as wood ever will. And they did not fight the grain, they followed it. A ship's frame is not sawn from straight planks. It is built from compass timber, oak that grew already curved, a bow or a root bend that matches the shape of the hull, cut into pieces called futtocks that stack up to make each rib. Wood is strongest along its grain, so a curved timber that follows the curve of the ship is worth 10 straight ones bent by force. The American frigate Constitution was built of southern live oak, so dense and tough that in the War of 1812, British cannonballs were seen to bounce off her sides. That is how she earned the name Old Ironsides. She had no iron on her at all, just the right oak, cut the right way. Then came the fastening. Instead of a screw, they used a trunnel. Some call it a tree nail, which is exactly what the word says, a nail made of tree. It is a wooden peg, usually riven oak, and riving means split from the log along the grain rather than sawn across it, so every fiber runs the full length of the peg and nothing is cut short. They drove that peg through the planking and deep into the oak frame behind it. Now here is the part that turns a good joint into one that outlives you. They bored the hole in the plank and the hole in the frame just slightly out of line with each other. A drawbore, they called it, and the offset was maybe the thickness of a fingernail. When you drive a peg through 2 holes that do not quite agree, the peg has to bend to make them meet, and as it bends, it hauls the 2 pieces of wood together, tighter than any clamp, and it stays pulling for as long as the peg lives. That is your clamp. A clamp you never have to take off, and then the sea does the rest. That oak peg is hygroscopic too, remember? The moment it takes on water, it swells inside the hole, gripping the walls, sealing itself. It is the same wood as the timber around it, so it breathes at the same rate and moves at the same rate, and it never tears its neighbor the way my screw did. Metal fights the wood. The trunnel joins it. Where a steel fastening rusts and bleeds and sickens the timber around it, a wooden peg does the opposite. It gets tighter with age. A shipwright at the old Essex yard once told a young apprentice that a joint like that would hold longer than you and me both, and he was right. Some of those pegs are still holding today, down under the waterline of ships, older than every person watching this. Trust the wood. If your joints have ever failed you the way the gate failed me, I put everything I know about wooden fastening into a guide called Secrets of the Shipyard. 150 pages on tree nails, drawboard joints, and watertight fits that hold without a drop of glue, so what you build tightens with age. Scan the QR code on your screen. By the winter of 1853, in the cold water off a place called Sinope on the Black Sea, something happened that would make every one of those beautiful oak walls worthless, and almost nobody building ships that morning saw it for what it truly was. And these ships were sealed with the very same craft that fastened them. The planks were fitted, so their faying surfaces, the two faces of wood that meet and marry along a seam, came together tight, and then every seam was packed with oakum, which is loose tarred hemp fiber driven hard into the gap with an iron and a mallet until not a drop could weep through. Over that went hot pitch and tar. A ship of the line was a mountain of seasoned oak, sealed with tar, coated in tar, floating on tar, and packed below with barrels of gunpowder. Hold that picture. It matters in a moment. For 200 years, a warship fired solid iron balls. Round shot, they called it. A cannonball is a terrible thing, but against thick oak, it does an honest, survivable kind of damage. It punches a hole. The ship's carpenters plug the hole with a wooden shot plug. They drag a sail across the wound to slow the leak, and they keep fighting. Oak is forgiving that way. It splinters, but it holds. Then a French artillery officer named Henri-Joseph Péchance asked a simple, awful question. What if the ball did not just punch the wood? What if it buried itself in the timber and then exploded? That is a shell gun. Round shot goes through and out. A shell goes in, and then it goes off, blowing the hole open from the inside and setting the whole splintered mess alight. And a wooden ship, remember, is all that seasoned oak, soaked in tar and packed with powder. Here is the detail everyone had missed. The very thing that made these ships majestic, all that oak, was now the finest kindling an enemy could ask for. At Sinope, a Russian squadron carrying these new shell guns met a squadron of wooden ships that did not have them. It was not a battle. It was a bonfire. In a couple of hours, the wooden ships were burning wrecks on the water. Every navy in the world read those reports and felt the floor tilt under them. The oak wall, the thing that had ruled the sea since before their grandfathers were born, had just been shown to burn like a woodpile. Pay close attention to what comes next, because this is the part that explains the whole vanishing. When your enemy's fire will set your ship alight from the inside, you have exactly one answer left. You have to stop the fire from ever getting in, and you cannot do that with wood. Toulon, in France, 1859. The French launched a ship called Gloire, and she was still a wooden ship at heart, still built of seasoned oak the old way, but they had bolted a thick belt of iron armor, plating along her sides. Shells struck that iron and burst against it, and never reached the timber underneath. Overnight, every unarmored wooden ship on Earth became a target that could not hit back hard enough to matter. Britain answered within the year. 1860, they launched Warrior, and Warrior went one step further. Her hull was not wood-clad in iron. Her hull was iron itself. And you can still walk her decks in Portsmouth today, moored a stone's throw from the wooden Victory, the two of them side by side, like a father and the son who buried him. But this was not just about Britain and France anymore. Something else had been changing under all of it, quietly, for years. Steam. For 2 centuries, a warship went where the wind allowed and no further. Now, an engine and a screw propeller turning below the waterline meant a ship could drive straight at you into the wind, with no sails to burn and no weather to wait on. Put those 3 things together: the shell gun that made wood deadly, the iron that stopped the shell, and the steam that freed the ship from the sky, and the wooden ship of the line was not beaten. It was simply from another world. And what makes it sting, if you love this craft, is that the wooden shipwrights had just reached the very top of their art. A surveyor named Sir Robert Seppings had lately worked out how to brace a long hull with great diagonal timbers, riders set across the frames, so the ship no longer drooped at bow and stern under its own weight, a slow bending that old sailors called hogging. He had made the wooden hull stronger and longer than anyone before him. The craft had never been better, and it did not matter at all. Here is the thing that I still find hard to hold in my head as a man who works in wood. Think about how long it takes to grow and change a whole trade. These forests had been planted and tended for 100 years because an oak is not fit for a keel until it has stood for a century. The yards had families in them going back generations, fathers teaching sons the set of a plank and the swing of an adze. All of it, the forests, the skills, the ponds full of seasoning timber, had maybe 10 years left. From the launch of Gloire to the day the great wooden battle fleets were obsolete was about a single decade. A trade that took 300 years to perfect was gone in 10. You can still see the ghost of it if you know where to look. In England, there is a great old woodland called the Forest of Dean, planted and replanted for generations to grow ship timber for the crown, oak set into the ground by men who knew they would be dead long before it was ever fit to cut. When the fleets turned to iron, that timber lost its purpose almost overnight. The trees kept right on growing. The buyers simply stopped coming. And in the breakers' yards along the coast, men who had spent 40 years learning to read a grain and hang a plank found there was suddenly no work for hands like theirs. The great sheds where whole ships had once taken shape went quiet, and the steady knock of the caulking mallet, a sound that had rung along every dockside in the country, faded out of the world almost completely. And the part that sits heaviest with me is that the shipwrights saw it coming and could do nothing at all to stop it. You would think someone could have saved the craft. Nobody could. It was not that anyone did anything wrong. It was not a betrayal or a scandal or some quiet plot to kill the old ways, whatever you might read somewhere. The honest answer is simpler and harder to swallow than any conspiracy. A better machine arrived. Iron and steam and explosive shells did to the oak wall exactly what the tractor later did to the workhorse. The craft did not fail. It was outrun. So why does an old shipwright spend his evenings teaching you about ships the world threw away 150 years ago? Because the ships lost, but the knowledge inside them did not. The iron won out at sea, in the one place where a hull has to stop cannon fire, and it turned out wood simply could not. But you are not building a warship. You are building a gate, a workbench, a little boat for the lake, a table your grandchildren will one day eat at. And in your world, on dry land and in fresh water, everything those builders knew is still just as true as it ever was. Wood still breathes, metal still fights it. A riven oak peg driven into a drawboard hole will still outlast the shiniest screw in the hardware store because it moves with the timber instead of against it. The reason those hulls lasted lifetimes was never a secret, and it was never truly lost. It was only forgotten by people in a hurry. That is the strange gift the wooden warship left behind. The ships themselves are gone, broken up and sunk and rotted into the mud of 100 harbors. But the joints outlived the ships. The seasoned oak, the compass timber followed along its grain, the trunnel, the drawbore, the seam packed tight with oakum. None of that sank with the fleet. It is sitting in your shop right now, in a wooden peg and a wooden mallet, waiting for you to remember it. Build the way they built, and the thing you make this weekend can quietly outlast you too. Everything I know about making wood last that long lives in secrets of the shipyard, 16 chapters on the old preservation methods, pitch and tallow and pine tar and linseed oil, plus 3 full build projects for the weekend. The link is in the description. And if you want more of this, subscribe to the Master Shipwright, where we keep the ocean-tested, centuries-lasting ways of working wood alive. Take your time, trust the wood, and I will see you back in the shop.